We're gonna go into strength training for professional wrestling, and we're gonna start right now. So right off the bat, let's talk about professional wrestling and just clarify for all of you guys out there, we are discussing the extremely acrobatic, absolutely crazy, dramatic, over-the-top sport / entertainment version of wrestling, and that's professional wrestling, okay? We are not talking about freestyle wrestling. We're not talking about swinging. We're not talking about beach wrestling. We're not talking about Greco-Roman wrestling. We're not talking about folk style sambo. We are talking about professional freaking wrestling. And I'm pretty excited to do this. This is the first time we've ever done this on any of our channels. And so we've got to look through that lens of what this sport embodies. If we can think about old classics, my personal favorite professional wrestler growing up was Diamond Dallas Page. And Diamond Dallas Page actually, from what I understand, is like a yoga guru right now. So when I think about the days of worshiping Diamond Dallas Page and what he used to do and the shirts that I used to wear, he was an absolute animal. In my mind, looking back, he just had stacks of muscle on his deltoids, okay? He wasn't as monstrous as someone like Brock Lesnar or Kurt Angle or The Rock, but he still was jacked. He was lean, extraordinarily lean. He also had phenomenal explosiveness. He could jump off the ropes and just do absolutely crazy moves. And so there's a lot of athleticism that goes into this. We have to think about his physique. We have to think about his ability to handle force. And we actually have to think about his mobility as well. And so when we look at what that sport is, these shows last a very long time, anywhere from a half an hour all the way up to 2+ hours. So we've got to think through that lens as well. And I know there's probably someone in the comments right now saying, this isn't a sport. Shut up. No one cares about your lame arguments. No one cares at all. Look at the actual physical capability that these people have to have. I know that they're not technically being judged, but from a value perspective, from an entertainment perspective, they're still judged on who's got the best personality, who's got the best acting skills, who has the best ability to execute crazy moves. So they've got to embody those different aspects. So I don't care about your this isn't a sport bowl. Another thing, we got to think about somebody like John Cena, who's just ungodly jacked back in the day, along with The Rock, who both of these guys are back in the WWE now, and what their body looked like, how they achieved that greatness, and then what that means for strength training for professional wrestling. And that's going to take us right into that first key concept. You have to be explosive. So if we look at that tip number 1, you have to be explosive. If you're gonna do strength training for professional wrestling, you've gotta be explosive. That means, look at someone like John Cena. Doing Olympic lifts, you can do power snatches, you can do power cleans, you can do full cleans. We mentioned that mobility, that's gonna come up later on. Full base Olympic lifts can lead to a drastic improvement in your overall explosiveness and your overall mobility. So if we are training to be as explosive as possible, we also need to be doing some type of plyometric work. That's gonna help us with our jumps. That's gonna help us with our grounding capability. That's gonna help us with that force production and force absorption. So we've gotta look through that lens of technical coordination and then ultimately plyometric training if we want to be as explosive as possible. And that's gonna take us into that next key aspect. So tip number 2 is going to be focus on absolute strength. And there's a couple reasons around this. And I'm thinking about right now, one of the matches when The Undertaker, I think he threw Mick Foley off of the top of the cage through some tables, right? And you can just see this, I can see this playing out right now with the highlight. This was back when I was in like high school or college. I think I might have still been in high school actually. And the strength that is needed to handle that grounding, falling through those tables, I believe quite a bit of absolute strength work will pay off. Okay, that's where you can deal with forces a little bit better. Your joints will be more structurally sound. Now, we need to make sure that if we're training for professional wrestling, we're doing the actual skills, the skill work, which is gonna come up in a little bit. But if we can do that skill work and balance it with periodization accordingly with that absolute strength training, we can focus on things like back squats, single leg squats, front squats, bench presses, pull-ups. Those are all exercises that can develop that absolute strength. and it can develop that crazy physique, which is going to lead us into that third key aspect. So we started off with explosiveness, we went into absolute strength. That third key aspect is we've got to be hypertrophic. Now, if we're doing big compound movements, like a back squat, like the front squat, like a bench, like a pull-up, those exercises are gonna lead to that hypertrophic body. But I also believe that we can focus on some isolation movements, some machine-based movements, and a lot of dumbbell work to lead to a bodybuilding-esque type body, okay? That body that is just swole, that DDP body in my memory that was just flooded with DDP back in the day, or someone like The Rock in his heyday, right? So we've got to do some type of dumbbell work, some type of hypertrophy bodybuilding work so that we can develop massive shoulders, massive traps, massive biceps, massive triceps, huge freaking quads on the leg press. All of those movements will lead to optimizing your body for hypertrophic gains. Again, it's gonna come back to how do we balance this so everything has this unique flow? Just popped into my head. I haven't even mentioned somebody like Triple H, absolute legend in the sport. Now that's gonna take us into gymnastics, okay? So one of the other crazy aspects about professional wrestling is how agile these athletes are, how big and explosive these individuals are. And I'm actually thinking about one of the women who won the American Ninja Warrior. She joined at WWE and she sort of bounced around between NXT and WWE. I can't think of her name right now, but she is someone who has tremendous gymnastics pedigree, right? Just background is basically all in gymnastics. She can do crazy, crazy stuff. She hasn't panned out as tremendously as some individuals thought she would in the realm of professional wrestling, but she was a stud. And if we look at some of the other more athletic individuals, a lot of them were very good at things like tumbling. So we have to figure out in our training, if we're doing some type of gymnastic-based work, how are we rolling properly? How are we flipping properly? And this also, okay, if we can look at something like a sport like parkour or free running, and then look at gymnastics and try to combine this at least once a week, this is gonna be part of our strength training. These are very specific skills that can help us handle those drops onto crazy tables. So we've got to think through, all right, gymnastics, parkour, free running, those are very, very unique aspects that a lot of these professional wrestlers have to use, they have to develop if they want to be over the top with their stunts and with their overall performances. So those are some really, really key aspects. And then finally, that brings us to that last big aspect, which I believe is going to be recovery/mobility. These athletes are taking on a beating every single week, multiple days out of the week. They have to focus on their recovery. They have to focus on sleeping as well as they possibly can, even though they're traveling all the time. They have to focus on eating as much protein. They have to focus on, again, mobility, lengthening those muscles, creating that structurally stable joint capsule in each and every joint, and making sure that if you're banged up from an actual event, that you can still compete and perform so you can get that nice paycheck. Ideally, you're gonna be focusing on mobility every single morning for 15 to 20 minutes. You're gonna be focusing on mobility every night, 15 to 20 minutes at least. You're gonna be prioritizing 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight for your protein intake. You're gonna be trying to be sleeping 8 to 10 hours every single night, and that's gonna optimize your overall recovery. And this goes back to, you should be doing gymnastics or parkour or free running once a week. Okay, we've got to focus on hypertrophy 2 to 3 days a week. We got to focus on absolute strength twice a week. We got to focus on that explosiveness at least 2 to 3 days a week. If you guys need help with that programming to become that elite level professional wrestler, head over to Peak Strength, that app, the Google Play Store, the Apple iOS Store, and you can download our app. We want to give you 5 free workouts so that you guys can start getting as swole as possible. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.